Hope you're doing well today and you're enjoying this fantastic weather and you're just having a super excited and awesome day. We're over halfway through with the second portion of this course, right? So we did chapter 5, which looked at a lot of consumer surplus and producer surplus and talking about what happens when there are inefficiencies in the system. Then we had chapter 6, who went on to a lot of the marginal social cost, marginal social benefit, taxes, subsidies, and a lot of the other different sorts of ways that governments can make decisions or allocations. Then today, what we're going to be moving to is chapter 16. So this starts going into the idea of public goods. This one I'm actually really excited about because I'm a public economist. So studying public goods and public choice and public finance is basically what I do, right? This is understanding the taxation and expenditures of government, but it's also understanding, like, why do we have certain policies? Are they efficient? Are they not efficient? When do we actually need to do something to make it more efficient? Or when should we just kind of step away and let the market operate on its own? These are really interesting and fundamental questions of why our entire system works the way it does and how it can be improved or how it could be worse off, and understanding the differences in between those things. So I'm excited to share this information with you. So let's go ahead, share screen, and jump right on into it. Alrighty, so public choice, public goods, and healthcare is chapter 16. We actually don't talk about healthcare all that much, but you know what? We'll go into it anyways. So what do I need you to know from this chapter to be a super successful economist? Okay, well, if you're going to be a super successful economist, what you're going to need is 3 things for this chapter. The first one is to explain why some choices are public choices. Why are these public choices at all? Why do they matter? How do we make this in a political marketplace? What's the relationship in between bureaucrats and politicians and firms and households, and how do they all work together? Then 2, we're going to have to figure out the free rider problem. Don't worry, I'm going to tell you what the free rider problem is and kind of talk a little bit about how it arises and understand the quantity of public goods that we decide to put into the market, right? When do we decide to overproduce or underproduce, or when do we need to do some sort of correction for that? Then the third topic from this that might be kind of interesting for you to know, especially because, you know, right now healthcare is a very debated topic, and it's one that's going to have a lot of changes over the next few years as policymakers make different decisions. So understanding the relationship in between government and healthcare and how healthcare markets work is also going to be really important for you, and might just be an interesting way to help make you more informed about life, right? So what is public choice? I don't know why I paused, like you were going to respond to me. I keep forgetting that I'm just kind of like talking to a wall in my basement. But public choice is some sort of decision that has consequences for many people, perhaps even for an entire society, right? Most of the time, if you decide to buy something, it just affects you. If I buy a Nintendo Switch, that's kind of a decision that sort of just matters for me. If I buy a new phone plan, that's a decision that matters for me. If I decide to wear a blue scrunchie instead of a brown scrunchie, that does not affect the rest of the world. It really only affects me. But sometimes there are choices that are going to affect more than just us, right? If I decide that I'm going to have a steel company and it's cheaper for me to throw all of my junk steel and pollution into the river as opposed to, you know, paying to have it disposed of the proper way. Well, if I decide to just pollute the river, I'm making a decision because it's cheaper for me, right? What I'm not considering is that decision actually affects lots of people. There might be hundreds of people that live along this now poisoned river whose life is going to be different because of this decision. Maybe I'm a mayor and I decide to have a public water source instead of buying it from a private company. We decide to have our own sanitation plant. Well, that's not only going to affect me, that's going to affect every single person that lives within that town, right? So public choices are choices that have consequences for lots and lots of people. And they may not necessarily be ones that you think about. Like I might not think about what happens to everybody that lives down the river if I pollute the river. I may not think about what happens to everybody in the next town over if I have giant smokestacks on my factory and the smog goes to the next our state over. That's why we have the idea of public choice, and that's why there's public economists like me, because sometimes these things happen and we have to rationalize them, and we have to come up to a consensus or come up with some sort of solution or process to make it so that what people's private cost and benefit are, or a little bit closer to what the social cost and benefit are, so that we would have more optimal decisions for society. So let's have a couple examples of this. First, like a decision by a political leader or senior public servants about the prices and quantities of a regulation, or about the amount of taxes, or how much we're going to trade, and if we're going to put tariffs on that trade, and government spending. These are sort of public choice things. Let's see, some of the things we care most about are decided by people making public choices, right? So you can't make a decision for every single thing that happens. It would be exhausting and take all your time. You can't figure out exactly what we're going to do for telecom in the city of Edwardsville, and water in the city of Edwardsville, and what St. Louis is going to do with their road tax, and where exactly it's going to go, and what about toll roads, and what about bridge construction, and how to raise the money for bridge construction. You can't make every decision. You don't have the physical time, right? So what we do is we elect political leaders that we think are going to make decisions kind of close to what we want, ideally. And you put them in office, and then you kind of let them go. But these are the people making decisions on how to allocate very large quantities of scarce resources that affect a lot of people. So why do we need this government system in the first place? Well, for example, let's think about the bridge that goes in between, let's see, Edwardsville. When you go down, you go past Granite City. I'm not exactly sure what's right across the river, but then we go over to St. Louis, right? There's a bridge there. I can't go to every single person and get their feelings about the bridge. I cannot go to every single person and find out their willingness to pay for the bridge. And I can't go to every single construction company and find out their willingness to accept for the bridge. And we can't all do that separately and hope to get to a resolution that builds a bridge, right? So sometimes we need governments to allocate large quantities of resources because it helps put the deciding factor on one group or one space of time. So we elect a politician who ideally would want or not want the bridge, depending on if the people wanted or did not want the bridge. And then they're in charge of figuring out, okay, I'm going to talk to the construction companies, and I'm going to talk to the people, and I'm going to figure out how much time this is going to save in commutes. And then I'm going to figure out how to cost efficiently build the bridge. And we tell someone like, hey, that's your job. Your job is bridge building. This is a way of being able to allocate large quantities of resources that affect lots of people without having to have every single person try to make this decision, because trying to get everybody to agree and talk to each other and on the same timeline is difficult, right? You can't even get people together for a group project. How are you supposed to get together entire towns to discuss a bridge? So why do governments exist? So your book gives you 3 reasons for why governments exist, and then I suggest a 4th. So the first one is to establish and maintain property rights. Your house, that's your house, right? Someone can't just come into your house and say, hey, this is my house, now get out. And that's because there's some sort of property rights that are maintained and established. This is my phone, I paid for the phone, it is only my phone. That is a property right. Someone can't come and just take the phone, right? Because we have maintained property rights. If they steal it, then I can call up, some sort of help and be like, yo, they stole my phone, that's not cool. And then they could get it back, right? Because there's maintained property rights. If we have a system where we know who belongs or what belongs to whom, that helps us figure out allocations and resources. The second one is to provide non-market mechanisms for allocating scarce resources. The WIC program, right? So the WIC program is financial assistance for single mothers or young women or women in general who might have small children who need assistance because they have infants that they necessarily can't get the right nutritional support for. And this is a way of being able to help get them access to food, nutritious food, to be able to help with the infant's health and with the mother's health, right? This non-market mechanism, so we're not telling them, hey, you have to go buy and sell in the market and you may or may not get something. What it's saying is, okay, we understand that this is a group that particularly needs help and needs assistance for this. So we have these scarce resources of this pool of money to be able to help buy nutritious food. And the point of the government is to allocate some of these scarce resources and give them to the people that might actually need them, right? These non-market mechanisms are other ways of being able to help help people who might need them, or allocate scarce resources in a way that may not necessarily just be buying and selling things. It might be evaluating the need for somebody, or evaluating if someone needs help and then providing that help. That's something that we tend to have government for, because it helps facilitate a lot of these different trades and interactions. A third one is to implement arrangements that redistribute income and wealth. So if we decide as a society that some people at the very top brackets should make less money, and people at the very, very bottom brackets who can't necessarily pay their rent or afford food, they need a little bit more money to be able to afford food. This redistribution, that's because of a system of government, right? The fourth one, so your book only has those first three, but I have a PhD in econ and I specialize in public economics, and I have been doing this for the last 10 years, and I'm going to argue that there's a fourth. And that's to provide a judiciary system, right? It doesn't matter if you have property rights or a way to allocate things or a way to redistribute. If there's no way to go to a court and argue, like, is this legal? Is this ethical? Is this some sort of arrangement? If I go up to someone and I'm like, hey, they stole my phone. How awful. They stole my phone and burned down my house. Being able to sue someone for damages because they infringed upon my property rights, or I infringed upon their property rights. This is a fundamental part of government, is essentially ending the arguments in between people, right? It's providing a judiciary system so that we have one moral ability to understand, like, what is ethical and what is constitutional versus what may not be, right? And this provides background into essentially what legal terms are. This provides background into what might be considered lawful and what might not be considered lawful. And this changes over time, right? Judiciary systems completely change, and the opinions of people and government change and grow over time. But that's still a function of government, right? Is to just be able to uphold property rights. So, okay, so establish, provide, implement, provide again, and this is the judiciary system. So these are kind of reasons for government, right? But governments also fail. So ideally, it's nice if government can give resources to where those resources need to be, but sometimes replacing markets, the buying and selling system, with having a government come in and try to make these resource allocations, it's no simple matter. It doesn't automatically work, right? You can't just say, like, hey, there's this group of people who need help, government, go do it. It doesn't necessarily work that way. And government failure often happens. It's a situation in which government action leads to inefficiencies. Sometimes we purposefully add inefficiencies, right? That's why do they tax cigarettes so heavily? It's because it leads to people smoking less, because now they're really more expensive. That's not going to exactly where cost equals benefit. It's not going to where supply equals demand. It's adding in this additional cost and purposefully putting in an inefficiency to try to drive out some behavior. So government failures can lead to overproduction of something or overprovision. We're producing too much of something. It can lead to underprovision, where we're producing too few of something. And this is a really interesting concept, because government is a very complicated matter. I mean, I've been studying this for 10 years. I wrote a dissertation on it. I became Dr. Plemmmons over studying why governments make the decisions that they do, and I still don't understand everything, because it's a very complex system. So let's think about public choice. So these choices that might affect lots of people. So we have to kind of take into consideration what's happening in these systems. Let's take this and try to match it together with the political marketplace. So in this, I'm just kind of going to talk about the directions of what's traded in between voters and firms and politicians and bureaucrats, right? So you all probably know this, right? Especially because you've probably voted recently, or you might vote because, you know, there's elections and you're legal adults. Voters express their demands via votes, right? So let's say that we have up here, we have demand. Voters and firms demand things, right? You as a voter, you demand policies that you would like, and you demand people who should uphold the policies that you like. And then firms, they demand treatment or corrections or resources from government as well. So that's the demand side. The supply side, the purpose of government is to supply when it is inefficient for private sectors to do so, right? So you have politicians. Politicians tend to be voted on, and then you have bureaucrats. Bureaucrats are appointed generally, or they are just selected by some other process. They are not directly voted for. So voters express their demands via votes, right? They vote, they have campaign funds, there's lobbying activity, because like firms, they lobby because they demand certain treatments and try to get politicians on their side. Voters, they vote because they want, politicians to be on their side, and that's what we do, right? Voters and firms express their demands through all these different ways, and politicians, in turn, give them policy proposals. So this is the idea that when someone's on the campaign trail, they might say, hey, I'm planning to do X, Y, and Z. And they give this policy proposal. In exchange, voters may or may not give their votes. So there's this going back and forth, right? The people demanding give their votes, and the people who are supplying give their policy proposals in order to try to get those votes. Let's think about the other side, right? So what else moves in between government and what else moves in between the people? Well, first is taxes, right? You pay income taxes, firm pays corporate taxes, there's sales taxes. I actually learned a really cool thing today. Did you know that the IRS has a 273 page contingency plan? I can't speak today. 273 page contingency plan. So if there's a drastic emergency in the US, say that there's a natural disaster that wipes out everything, or government completely shuts down, or there's some sort of coup, or there is just some sort of other really, really bad thing that happens that completely takes out financial markets and completely wipes out systems of governments and completely like blankets the entire United States in ash because there was an eruption from a volcano or something. They have a contingency plan so that they can go back to collecting and processing taxes within 12 hours of a national emergency that drastically changes the entire framework of the United States. One of their backup plans is that if the entire income tax system is taken out, they just put a blanket 20% sales tax on everything. I thought that was kind of neat because like they have the system, right? And it's a very complex system. Okay, I'll stop. Anyways, so the voters and firms, they pay taxes. This money goes to politicians and bureaucrats. Politicians, they're elected, so they tend to try to stay nearby the policy proposals that they gave to people in exchange for votes, but sometimes they don't. Bureaucrats are appointed, or they get their jobs through other means, so they don't necessarily have to make voters happy, so they want to be able to maximize money for their groups. Like the people at the FDA want more money for the FDA. The people who are at the CDC want more money for the CDC, so on and so forth. In exchange for these taxes, this is money in, the government provides public goods and services. So this is money for parks, national defense, Medicaid, Medicare, a bunch of other things, right? So public goods and services are provided using the money that comes in from these taxes. This right here is the entire political system, and we can do it with 4 arrows and 2 boxes, right? And it's just the relationship in between voters and firms on one side and politicians and bureaucrats on the other. So what is the idea of political equilibrium? Well, in a political equilibrium, the choices of voters and firms and politicians and bureaucrats are compatible. That's the idea that they give you an honest policy proposal that tells you exactly what they're going to do, and you make your vote exactly as you want it for the person who's exactly reflecting of your preferences. And then based upon those policy proposals, they give you the exact goods and services that they promised for the exact tax raise that was promised that you pay them. Does that happen? No, right? The idea of this system working perfectly doesn't happen because things are complicated, right? There's reasons to adjust preferences. There's reasons to update policy proposals. There's reasons to do lots of different things. So we don't necessarily always have a political equilibrium. We would like to, but there's not going to be a reality where the taxes that you pay are exactly what you're going to get back in services, and that your vote is always going to be for exactly a policy proposal that gets pushed through exactly 100%. It doesn't necessarily happen that way. So let's think about the idea of a public good, because I've been going on and on about this public thing. Let's talk about public goods. They're kind of cool. I paused for a second because I needed a tea break. So let's think about it. What is a public good? Well, there are essential differences between different types of goods, right? What's the difference between a city police officer and a private security person, right? There's a difference between private security and police. Fish in the ocean, that anybody can just go out there and fish in the ocean, or versus a fish farm where people are raising fish for private consumption to sell to grocery stores. How about a live concert that you paid money to and you're like, yeah, concert? Or what about a versus where that, so there's a ticket to get into that one, right? Versus maybe a live concert that's on Twitch and you can just go watch Deadmau5 on Twitch, right? Or on television. There's differences in between these. Which ones are public goods? So that they're available to everybody and you can't exclude anyone, and you using it doesn't really affect other people's ability to use it, versus things that are more private. So for example, the Brink security guard, I can definitely decide if I can exclude people or not from being protected from a security guard. You can't from a cop. If I have a private fish farm, I can tell you who is allowed to use it or not. I can exclude people from using my fish farm, but I can't exclude people from fishing in the ocean, right? These are different things. And with this, we have to have a couple interesting concepts. The first one's going to be the idea of classifying goods as either excludable or non-excludable. Can I stop other people from using it who didn't pay for it? And then there's the idea of rival versus non-rival. Does me using this good affect your ability to use this good? So first off, let's talk about excludable, right? So a good is excludable if only the people who pay for it are able to enjoy its benefits. For example, the Brink security services. Well, only the people who pay for those security services get the security services, right? It's like if you pay for the security alarm in your house, then you get access to the security alarm in your house. But the people who don't pay for it don't necessarily get it, right? Beyonce concert, right? If you pay to go to the concert, cool, you can go. But can Beyonce say, okay, people who did not pay cannot come to my conference? She can totally do that. Because it's Beyonce, right? And also you can exclude people who didn't necessarily pay for this. Ticket at a movie theater. If you didn't pay for a ticket to the movies, you can't just walk in and go to the movies, yeah? They can exclude people who didn't pay for a ticket. So these are the idea of excludable. On the other side are non-excludable goods. These are the ones where it's either impossible or extremely costly to prevent people from benefiting from it. The police are supposed to protect everyone, ideally. You can't just exclude people and say, nah, I don't want to protect you, in theory. Fish in the ocean. You can't exclude anyone from being able to just go out into the ocean and fish for things. We can't say, oh, nope, how dare you? No, only we're allowed to fish. You can't fish. No, thank you. You can't say that. You can't exclude people. A concert that's free on television or it's free on Twitch. You can't stop people who didn't pay for their Amazon Prime subscription from watching the Twitch concert, right? So these are all just different examples of excludable versus non-excludable goods. Now let's think about the other thing that I said. These are the idea of rival. Does your use of it affect other people's ability to use it? So a good that's rival means that if one person's using it, it decreases the quantity available for someone else to use. If I'm using this phone, you cannot use this phone. If I am drinking this cup of tea, you cannot drink this exact cup of tea. There's less tea for you to be able to drink. Let's see, a Brinks truck, the security people who ride around with all the money in the back, taking the money to banks, they can't deliver cash to two banks at the same time. It's a rival risk good. The truck can only go to one bank and the other bank is not able to use it because the first bank is using it, right? These are the idea of rival. Non-rival means one person's use of it doesn't decrease the ability for someone else, right? So, internet. If I'm using the internet at my house, it does not affect the ability for you to use the internet at your house. If I'm watching television in my house, it does not affect your ability to watch the television at your house. So there's 4 different types of goods that we're going to talk about. These 4 categories are going to be: first, private goods; second, public goods; 3, common resource goods, and 4 natural monopoly goods. Now, don't worry, I'm going to go into each and every one of those so that you understand them a little bit more in detail. So let's think about it. The first is going to be private goods. These are ones that are both rival and excludable. This phone, if you did not pay for the phone, you're not using my phone. I can exclude you from it. If I'm talking on this phone, you cannot talk on this phone. So it's rival. We're competing for being able to use it. This would be a private good. 98% of the goods probably are private goods, right? This is most everything. This is the idea of books. So this one's Licensing Occupations by Morris Kleiner. I've reread this book at least 30 times. It's pretty good for my subfield. Anyways, this is a private good, right? If you did not pay for the book, you don't get the book. It's excludable. If I'm reading this book, you can't read this book. It's rival. So these are ones that are both rival and excludable. All right, private goods, super easy to understand. Let's think about the next one. These are the idea of public goods. This is the other extreme, right? So private goods are rival and excludable. Public goods are non-rival and non-excludable. I can't stop anybody from using it, and me using it doesn't affect their ability to use it. Let's think about a public park, right? Well, if it's a public park and it's open to everyone, then I can't exclude people who don't pay taxes in that district from using the park. And if it's a really big park, me walking around the park doesn't affect someone else's ability to walk around the park. It's non-rival and it's non-excludable. Another one's the idea of national defense, right? So national defense, if I'm protected by the military doing whatever the military does, that doesn't affect your ability to be protected by the military doing whatever the military does. So they're non-rival. It's also non-excludable. I'm protected by the military doing whatever it does, and so is everyone who decides to not pay taxes. They're still protected by the military doing their thing, right? They can't just say, hey, we're only protecting the one that paid their taxes on time in 2019 or 2020 or 2021. You know, they can't necessarily say that. So they're non-rival and non-excludable. These are public goods. Public goods are the ones that you generally think of as being provided by government. The reason for this is because if I can't stop anyone from using it and one person's use of it doesn't affect another person's use of it, it's really hard to talk someone to pay for it, right? Or talk someone into paying for it. Who am I going to talk into paying for a park if they know they can use the park for free and anybody else using the park doesn't affect their ability to use the park? Why would they ever pay for the park? That's when the idea of government comes in, is to sort of rationalize these decisions. The third one, common resource. So these are ones that are rival but non-excludable. So I can't stop anyone from using it, but someone using it does affect another person's ability to use it. So a unit of a common resource can be used only once, but no one can be prevented from using it, right? So let's think about the Norwegian fishing market, right? So there is one type of fish that grows off, or that breeds off the coast of Norway. It's a very rare fish that people love to eat. I forget what the Norwegian name for it is though. So we're just gonna say like the Norwegian fish. Okay, so these fish, there's still a limited number of them, right? They're only like in one part of the ocean, and everybody wants to fish them, right? Well, I can't stop anybody from coming out to fish for these fish. It's non-excludable. I can't tell someone like, hey, if you didn't pay your taxes to the fishing preserve, you can't go fishing there. No, it's still in the ocean. Anybody can go fish, right? But there's still a finite number of these Norwegian fish. It's actually something that we've run into as a problem because there tends to be huge overfishing issues in these areas where these fish end up becoming really, really, really rare, because since we can't stop anyone from fishing there, everybody takes as much as they can, but it's rival, right? So if I take a lot of the fish, there's less fish for other people to be able to get. And if they take a lot of the fish, well, this affects the next generation, right? The next year when people come to fish, there's not many fish because we took so many fish out of the system that they had no way of making new fish. So these are the idea of common resources. Common resources is just, we can't stop anyone from using them, but people using them affects other people's ability to use them. The final one's going to be natural monopoly goods. These are the ones that are non-rival. So me using it doesn't affect your ability to use it, but they are excludable. That one's kind of interesting, right? So these are a special rare case of natural monopolies. We tend to see these when it comes to different sort of utilities, right? For example, electricity. If you don't pay your electric bill, the electric company can definitely turn off the electricity to your house, right? So they can exclude people who don't pay for it. But it's also non-rival. If I use electricity at my house, it does not affect the ability for you to use electricity at your house. The internet's kind of like that too, right? If I'm using the internet while recording this video, that doesn't affect your ability to use the internet to watch the videos. So these are called natural monopoly goods. They're typically utilities. So let's put this all into a graph. Honestly, this is probably the easiest way that you can remember this. I would take a box, split that box into 4, write rival and non-rival on 2 levels of the box, and then write excludable or non-excludable on the columns of the box. Then you have your 4 things. So if it's rival and excludable, it's a private good. This is your food and drink, this is your car, this is your house, this is most everything. If it's rival and non-excludable, it's right here. It's common resource goods. That's the idea of like fish in the ocean that might be overfished, clean air, national parks, right? And by national parks, I mean like the ones where there might only be a certain amount of people who are allowed to hike per year. So if you're one of those people who are allowed to hike, that means there's one less person who's allowed to hike. Or if I'm in a camping spot at a park, me being in that camping spot means you can't be in that camping spot. But technically I can't exclude anybody from being there because they're national parks. They're like free, right? Okay, let's think about the other side. What if they're non-rival? What if they're non-rival and excludable? This is that natural monopoly idea. I can stop people who didn't pay for internet for having internet, but like me using the internet doesn't affect your ability to use the internet. Public goods are the ones that are both non-excludable and non-rival. These are the tricky ones, right? Because you can't stop anyone from using them, and people using them doesn't affect anyone else's ability to use them. So these are kind of the things that our government buys, right? Our government tends to buy national defense, protection, construction and maintenance, transportation infrastructure, telecommunication infrastructure, medicine, so on and so forth, right? And this tends to be because they tend to be non-rival and non-excludable. But there's 2 that are kind of odd that the government buys that don't necessarily fit into this perfect public goods box. They tend to be healthcare and education. So they're still rival, right? There's only so many seats in this class. Some of you were on the wait list before this class started. You kind of know that there's a limited number of seats in this class. So technically they are rival. There's only so many seats in the classroom. Technically they can also be excludable. If you didn't pay your tuition, you can't come to class, right? So why aren't these kind of considered private goods? Why does the government still provide these? Well, let's think about that. What about these 2 big government expenditures? First, let's go through healthcare. So there's the idea, healthcare is really put into 2 parts, right? Everybody kind of lumps it into one big idea of healthcare, but there's actually 2 pieces to it. One is the healthcare insurance. So this is the money that gets paid into the system in case something goes wrong, right? It's sort of your rainy day fund of like, what happens if I break my leg, or what happens if I get sick? And sometimes people can't necessarily afford these costs. So the government looks at it and they say, well, technically, if we give health insurance to this group of people that can't afford it, we as a society, our surplus is actually larger, right? Because that means that these people are more likely to work, they're more likely to have successful children, they're more likely to be able to have resource to access. And then also, like, society's just not happy if there's dying sick people on the side of the street. That's not good. People aren't happy that way. So the total amount of happiness and surplus for society goes up if you provide healthcare insurance to people who cannot afford healthcare insurance. Okay, so there's the healthcare insurance part. That's something that government decides to provide because they look at the surplus of those situations, right? What's the happiness level if they don't provide it versus if they do provide it for the entire society? So what's the well-being? What's the surplus? How much better off are we if these people have more access to health and therefore have longer years that they can work, so on and so forth. Then there's the idea of healthcare services. So this is the idea of like providing checkups, physicals, veteran care, for, TRICARE for military people. It's the idea of providing vaccines. So why are your vaccines so cheap, or why can you go get free testing pretty much anywhere in Edwardsville? Because it's a service that the government provides, right? They subsidize it because they want more people to use it. Governments provide both of these because left to the market alone, we just don't provide enough. We don't provide what would actually be socially efficient. We provide what would be privately efficient. In private efficiency, insurance prices are here, but that means that there's a bunch of people who can't afford it. But social efficiency might be that society's better off if everyone can afford it. So why do we provide some healthcare insurance? It's because technically society's better off in some categories. Why does the government provide vaccines sometimes? It's because left alone, no one's willing to pay 20, 30 bucks for a flu shot. So if the government partially subsidizes it and pays for part of it, so a flu shot is either free or costs next to nothing for you, people are much more likely to actually go get flu shots. It's something that you want people to do more of so that you don't have rampant flu outbreaks. So government provides these because the market alone just wouldn't necessarily provide enough. There's also the idea of education for a very similar reason. Why does the government provide money to SIUE? Because they don't believe that we should be charging $100,000 in tuition. That would be ridiculous. No one would be able to go to school. It'd be very, very expensive if we tried to fund the entire education system purely off of tuition rates. So instead, they pay part of it because they know that there's an external benefit. It might benefit you to be in this class. Like, you're going to learn a lot of cool stuff about economics, and the amount of money that you're going to make in your life goes up, right? And that's good. And you like those things. But there's also external benefits to society. Society is much better off if we have a collection of people who can all read the road signs, and we have a collection of people who all can do math at the cash register, and we can all do all these different things. Having a society that's more educated actually has a lot of external benefits where the world's just better off. So sometimes the government provides public education because there's this spillover benefit. If you understand economics really well, then that means that you're going to buy and shop in a way that's more economical. And then other people are going to learn from that. And there's going to be spillovers where those people are better off. And then all of your friends who hear about your cool econ lectures at the bar, they're going to be better off and their life's cool. There's spillovers to education that have external benefits. So the government either provides public goods that are non-rival and non-excludable, or sometimes they also provide goods where there's more benefit to society than the government not providing it. So then we also have the idea of the free rider problem. We see this all the time when it comes to public goods. Free riders are the idea that there's some people who enjoy the benefits of a good or service without paying for it. These are people who go to the park even though they don't pay their taxes. These are people who, let's see, what's a really good free rider problem example? I don't know why I'm blanking today. People who really enjoy the Edwardsville fireworks show or the Edwardsville parades, even if they don't pay their taxes to Edwardsville, right? Because they can't really be excluded, so why pay for it? There's no point in them paying for it. Like, why pay my taxes if I get all the cool stuff for free? It's that sort of idea, right? Public goods create this free rider incentive where you can look at something and say, well, I'm going to get this good whether I pay for it or not, because it's non-excludable and it's non-rival. So why pay for it? It's the absence of an incentive for people to pay. It's so you're in a situation where you may not necessarily want to pay for something. The value of a private good, right, is the maximum a person is willing to pay for it. The private benefit of the scrunchie is the maximum amount that I'm willing to pay for the scrunchie. The maximum amount that I'm willing to pay for this phone, this is my value of the private good for me. Huh, it's making a noise. I guess it's because I broke my camera. I think there's like a piece of glass in there. Anyways, then there's the value of a public good, right? So a private good is the maximum amount that I'm willing to pay for it. A public good is the maximum amount that all the people are willing to pay for it. So if we wanted to think about the idea of putting a new park in town, I'm willing to pay $100 for the park. You're maybe willing to pay $10 for the park. Someone over there is willing to pay $15 for the park. The amount that all of us together are willing to pay, in that case, it was $125. Well, that's $125 towards the park. The value of the public good is the total amount that all of us would be willing to pay for it. Private goods, the value of that is just how much I'm willing to pay. So calculating the value placed on a public good, we need to have an idea of these total benefits and these marginal benefits, right? So notice that I've mentioned many times in this class marginal benefit. It's the extra bit of happiness that you get from one more of something. But there's also a marginal social benefit. I bet you saw that on your last homework too, because I had used these terms before to get us thinking about what a social benefit or a social cost is. A marginal social benefit from a public good is the total benefit that society gets from one more of something. How much happiness does everyone in Edwardsville get for one more park? How much happiness does everyone in Edwardsville get from having one more fire truck, right? The marginal social benefit is how much better off society is. The marginal benefit from one more of something. And much like the private marginal benefit, for the social marginal benefit, it diminishes with the quantity, right? If we already have 3 parks, then as a society, we're not all that much better off from a 4th park than we were from getting the very, very first park. Marginal benefit still goes down like it would privately when we're starting to talk about a public situation. So let's think about firefighting airplanes, right? They're kind of cool. They come in and they go, and then they drop a bunch of water and they go, and keep going, right? I know my plane noises are ridiculously bad, but in all fairness, you don't want me to make real plane noises because your eardrums will be blown out right now. So these firefighting airplanes, and I think these are actually kind of cool to think about because we have the Boeing plant right down the road, right? It's, if you're heading towards the airport, it's right over on the other side of the river, and they employ, actually a lot of economists from SIUE have ended up there because, you know, economists, we can work on cool public good things, and they go work for Boeing, but they make a lot of military airplanes, and one that they work on in particular are firefighting airplanes. So these are ones that have kind of an empty hull that can hold large amounts of water, and they have a system for just going whoop, and all the water falls out, right? Firefighting airplanes are a public good. If I'm fighting a giant fire in Edwardsville with a firefighting airplane, I can't exclude anyone who didn't pay their taxes from the plane from getting protected by the water getting dropped from the plane, right? I can't just say, oh, nope, not going to hit that house. They didn't pay their taxes. No, this is a non-excludable thing. So whoo, they go over, they help everyone. It's also non-rivalrous, right? If the firefighting plane puts out a fire in Edwardsville, my benefit from not having a fire in Edwardsville does not affect your ability to benefit from not having a fire in Edwardsville, right? So these are public goods. So let's see what 2 different people's marginal benefit would be from these firefighting planes. Well, maybe, let's talk about Lisa first. She's at the top. Well, maybe for the first firefighting airplane, she gets like 80 benefit, right? $80 of benefit from this plane being in the area that can protect her house if there's a fire. Well, maybe for the second plane, she's not going to get as much benefit, right? Because we already have 1 firefighting plane, bringing her like $80 of benefit. But maybe a second firefighting plane is good too. Not as good, but it's good too. So maybe her marginal benefit from the second firefighting plane is 60, and then maybe 40, and then maybe about 20 for this last one. So for the 4th plane, she's like, we already got 3 planes. I still get like $20 of benefit as a just in case. Maybe there's a really, really big fire. We need 4 planes. Like I get a little bit of benefit. But by the 5th one, she's like, nope, I get absolutely no benefit going from 4 planes to 5 planes. That's ridiculous. We don't need it, right? You see her marginal benefit is decreasing till it eventually reaches 0. All right, let's think about Max. Max is on this bottom part. Let's say that like maybe Max doesn't have as expensive of a house, or maybe he doesn't keep all of his really, really valuable stuff in Edwardsville. So Edwardsville having a firefighting plane doesn't bring him as much benefit for the first plane as it would for Lisa, right? For Lisa, it brought her $80 of benefit. But maybe for this first plane instead, it brings Max $50 of benefit. And then maybe the second one brings him 40 and 30 and 20 and 10. He still gets some benefit from the 5th plane because his only goes down 10 each time. So that first plane, yeah, that's cool. The second plane, that's cool. Third plane, cool. Second plane, all right. First plane, I'll still pay for it, right? His is a slower decrease than Lisa's, which was just like, yeah, first plane. And then by the time we got to the 5th, she's like, nah, I'm not paying for a 5th plane. So these are their marginal benefits together, right? These are their private marginal benefits. But the thing is, we're starting to talk about the social marginal benefit. We need to know what society is benefiting from this. So how do we actually add these together? Well, we do it as a horizontal summation. Normally when we're talking about like market demand, right, we move the demand curve outwards. We sum things horizontally, or excuse me, vertically. Yes? Horizontally. Yes. I'm getting confused about things. I'm sorry about this. It's just, I always get confused about like which one's vertical and which one's horizontal. I kind of got to think like horizon, looking out on the horizon's flat, so that must be the horizontal one. I've been doing math my entire life and I still have problems with this. Anyways, so for market demand, we add up those different demand curves horizontally across the horizontal axis for like, we have what the first person would have at that price, the second person, third, fourth, and we put it out this way. Public goods are a little different. We instead look at the quantity. So we go to quantity amount and then we add up what people are willing to pay for it. These are horizontally summed instead of vertically summed. So yet again, for market demand, we'll take like a price like $10. Who's willing to pay at $10? Okay, Mark's willing to pay for 4 at $10. Lisa's willing to pay 3 at $10. Jamie's willing to pay for 2 at $10. And we add it out that way at this price amount, what our quantity would be. Because quantity is on the bottom of the graph, right? On the other hand, we have quantity and marginal benefit for this system, public goods. Well, at that point, what we do is we go along the quantities. So we say, okay, one plane. How much happiness would these people get for one plane? Well, we know that Max gets 50 happiness or 50 benefit, right? Okay, so that's relative to the price that he'd be willing to pay. And then as a society, Lisa's also willing to pay $80. So we're going to have to add 80. That $50 that Max is willing to pay for the first plane, plus the $80 that Lisa's willing to pay for the first plane, that's $130 that society is willing to pay for this first plane. So our marginal benefit from the first plane for society is how much everybody's willingness to pay together is. And we see this for the second plane and the third plane and the fourth plane. Essentially what we're doing is we're stacking these two marginal benefit curves on top of each other. When we do that, we get the social marginal benefit curve. So let's think about what providing these public goods actually looks like. And you know what? I think that this is a good place to stop because we're about to go in sort of a different direction for the next few slides. So how about I'm going to pause the recording here, get up, stretch your legs, walk around, drink some water, enjoy some beautiful weather and like maybe go outside and run around in it. I don't know. And I will see you again soon when you come back to the next video. All right, everyone. Bye-bye.